Delighted to be joined by Professor Ajay Gudavarthy from JNU. He just authored this book. It's called Politics, Ethics and Emotions in New India. It's come out from Routledge and it is our Samruddha Bharat Foundation's first book in the Reshaping India series. Broadly, the book talks about how ethics and emotions can be used to shape hearts and minds. Thank you, Professor Gudavarthy, for joining us. If you want to just broadly show us your book also once.
Yes.
So this is the book. It's right now only the UK edition, but we are very soon going to be getting the India edition. Hopefully, Routledge should get it out by the end of this month.
This month, that's what we have been promised.
So fingers crossed.
Yes.
All right. So Professor Gudavarthy, this is basically an informal chat. We do this video podcast, so we try to get together India's foremost experts to have a brief informal chat on issues that are relevant not just today, but structurally for India long term also. So today we are going to be discussing your book broadly, but we are going to pick up some specific themes from your book and start discussing that. Before I begin asking questions, do you want to briefly just explain in camera something about your book? What made you write this? What was your motivation? What is your target audience? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. So let me begin by thanking you, Pushparaj, for this book and Samruddha Bharat, the kind of interest you guys have taken. It's been amazing working with you guys. So this book came out of my long-term engagement as a political theorist, since I keep following what's happening in Indian politics, and something very different one could see happening in the last 10 years, apart from the fact that there was a kind of an aberration of democracy and all the familiar things that we know, was that ability to generate a certain consent that this regime was, in spite of failures of governance, in spite of inflation, unemployment, whole range of things, was somewhat unprecedented. So that's what set me thinking that maybe it's not just the idea of a polarized society, but something more could be at hand here, along with polarization. And that's what I thought, to expand the scope of our study. I thought people seem to be responding more for emotive reasons. What kind of emotions are being mobilized? Maybe everyday ethics, how people look at life between what is good and bad, good and evil. Those usually myths are based on good and evil, right? So I thought that that's the frame that seems to be working in Indian politics, partly also globally. That's a big shift. Earlier it was all about the social part, social analysis, but now it's more about ethical, emotional analysis, which in a sense is also good for democracy, which means more participation, more involvement, more investment of people. So I don't negate the entire phenomena itself as being, some illiberal thing. I see that there is greater investment of the people, but then the question comes for people like us who are on the other side of the political divide: what should progressives, secularists, rationalists, left, social democrats, centrists, liberals, what can they do with the situation, instead of simply dismissing as entire thing being irrational and illiberal, which I think in itself will be a very anti-democratic instinct, right? I mean, in democracy, the thumb rule would be to respect people. So if people are acting in those registers of emotions and ethics, so the central question in the book is, how should secular progressives harness this new momentum in Indian politics?
Right. I mean, there are two questions that naturally come to mind here. One is that you're talking about the ability of right-wing regressive forces. I use the word regressive advisedly, but you're talking about their ability to shape consciousness using social cultural issues rather than welfare status issues. That's one part of the problem. And the other part of the problem is that the systems that are needed to actually shape this consciousness. Now, both of these have a common answer. Progressive forces don't really have those systems in place to actually shape consciousness beyond the state. And that's what I want to ask you. What are these systems that the BJP, the RSS and other political forces on the right are actively using to shape hearts and minds on social cultural issues, and progressive forces are not? One. And two, what can progressive forces do to actually breathe life into those systems?
Well, that's a very good question, Pushparaj. That's where our discomfort is. One, I think progressive left rational forces in general have a discomfort with culture. No, we almost equate culture with some kind of obscurantism, with some kind of superstition. That's our popular immediate thing that comes to our mind with culture is that. So, we are very, very uncomfortable with culture. So, to begin with, not all of culture is conservative. Second big difficulty we have, all centrist liberal forces, the moment you enter into that domain of culture, we give premium on individual rights. So, individual becomes a conflict, because culture is all about community, is all about group rights. So, we are always looking through the lens of, so we immediately equate that kind of a cultural mobilization with some kind of illiberal, rise of illiberality. So, if you look at Indian history, under Congress being a centrist liberal kind of a force, has always kept culture outside the domain. It left it to people. People can decide. It loosely, would say unity in diversity kind of a slogan, but by and large, cultural belief systems were left out of political mobilization. So, and in a true sense, in that liberal centrist mode that worked for India. But I think histories undergo change, certain histories. I mean, it's a very complex story. Part of it I write here is that I think as a result of social democratization that took place, globally now, culture has come to the fore. So, if you look at whether it's United States, whether it's Brazil, whether it's Turkey, now there is no way we can shy away from cultural questions. People are asking sometimes even economic and social questions through in cultural registers. So, I think culture, religion, family, I think in one sense have become at the core of political mobilization. Therefore, we do not have that old secular privilege of private versus public, that we will only look at public issues which are secular. Your religious belief is private, your gender beliefs are private, everything else is private, we will not look at it. That I don't think will work anymore. People are looking for more intense engagement with those issues. That is where right has an advantage, because right is, I mean, it is essentially illiberal, but they can also pretend to be liberal. If whatever works, they pick it up on board. They're thinking on their feet. And therefore, they don't have comms. If you look at the way RSS work, they begin with school, early schooling with children, they are working at the level of families, they are working at the level of neighborhoods, they are working with religious institutions. So, these are very intimate emotional zones for people. They define who they are in terms of their cultural selves. That is where I think rest of us progressives are at a real disadvantage. I think therefore, the part of the attempt in the book is that how do we reframe, how can we pick up questions that are in the intimate zone of family, religion, culture, community, in a more liberal, open-ended is it at all possible? Because for a long time we have, I think, collapsed the two. So, now I think is a question to open up that domain and see that can there be a more progressive reinterpretation of religious identity? Can there be a more progressive communitarian selves? No, that is the hard questions we will have to, I think there is no shying away from that.
Prof, I mean, this is an interesting thing that you say. I agree with you partially, but both Aurobindo and Gandhiji actively used all three things that you've talked about: culture, religion, community, and family, all four things actually. And in a sense, engaged with all of these concepts both normatively and programmatically on the ground. So, there is a precedence which perhaps progressive forces, political forces have forgotten, perhaps abdicated, right, outsourced to non-political forces. So, that is one part of the issue. So, is it so much, I mean, I am not saying that those questions need to, those programs and frameworks are readily applicable today, but there is a pre-existing precedent that we can actively borrow from, right?
True, absolutely. That I think, as you said, Gandhi was a genius of his times. Sure. I mean, look at the way everyday cultural symbols, the way he could, for instance, the way he linked sovereignty to salt. Just by saying that, we will produce our own salt, which is like an everyday use, a basic use. He linked the question of popular sovereignty. I mean, that's a genius kind of symbolism, right? I mean, and people voluntarily got mobilized the moment you can link your everyday life. Now, look at in Noakhali, when he went to stop riots, he just he called children from both sides, Muslims and, to come and play, because to just prove that everyday life across religious divide is the same. We all do the same things in our everyday life. So I think it is, I think Gandhi in that sense is absolutely, is where we have to go. I mean, in terms of the way he has used culture, a religious symbol. Of course, the complexity has gone up manifold. So we are not going to find ready-made formulations, solutions in Gandhi today. But that's at the back of my mind, that if there is one precedent, as you rightly said, I think that's Gandhi in the Indian case.
Let me just give you an example recently, and I'm asking you for a ready-made, perhaps not a ready-made answer, but certainly a vague hint on how we could use this this framework. So during the Bharat Jodo Yatra, I walked almost half the yatra. I had a very interesting conversation in Maharashtra. We were organizing interactions. We had a very interesting conversation with someone who said that unemployment is a major issue, political issue, but the RSS and the BJP are able to spin unemployment as a Hindu versus Muslim issue. And for the life of us, we couldn't figure out how they were able to do that. So they said, देखिए, what they are able to say is that नौकरियाँ इतनी हैं पब्लिक सेक्टर में, मुसलमान आपकी नौकरियाँ छीन रहा है आपसे. Muslims are stealing your jobs away from you. So you, especially Dalits and OBCs, must unite to counter this. Right? Now this is, as you said, linking salt with sovereignty. They are linking unemployment with othering of a minority. To put the question on the flip side, how would you, if you were a political if you were a political strategist, advise a progressive party on linking unemployment with a cultural issue?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. No, there we have to, one has to understand, Pushparaj, that what RSS begins with, their strength is that first they give Hindus a sense of belonging. That sense of belonging, which has certain emotive value, is then converted into an anti-Muslim rhetoric. They don't begin with an anti-Muslim sentiment. That's not where Hindus begin. They begin with a sense of belonging. So there is a civilizational discourse, there is a long history, there's a whole range of things. Once they mobilize them, then they convert it into an anti-Muslim rhetoric. So the question for me is that what is that narrative that can give a deep sense of belonging, a deep sense of security, a deep sense of collective for secularists? Because we speak in the language of constitution. Constitutional language is not an emotive language. It's a sensible language. It's a democratic language. It is a progressive language. As even Ambedkar said, constitutional morality has to be cultivated. That sentiment simply doesn't exist. So as even Ambedkar said, that fraternity, he said that cannot be a constitutional principle. That's what Ambedkar said. So I think that field outside, so that's the safe play. Centrist progressive parties played it very safe. Just constitution, go through policy making, modern state, judiciary, but that now we realize only has so much of reach on the ground.
I'm sure that a lot of younger political viewers would love to hear your views on this. Do you think that in this sense that you just characterize a certain rejection of community, family, culture as elitist, and you're not saying it, but I'm asking you to say it directly. You're presumably also pointing a finger at the leadership of the progressive parties that had existed in the last at least 15-20 years. And do you think that there is now, if they are calcified in time or fossilized operationally, do you think that they need to, in a sense, let go and let a new generation come in?
Of course, I think the new generation should come in, but it's not just about age, obviously. The new generation, if it is even more modernized, it's not going to work. I think the new generation with new sensibilities. I mean, look at the essence of much of what BJP, RSS speaks, even now I don't think resonates. But simply those forms, the way they speak Hindi, the way they can pick up local symbolism, that resonates so quickly. And imagine if we can do that.
But they're not being able, sorry to cut you, but they're not being able to do that in the regional languages, in the Indian languages.
Lot of it they're still struggling, but you never know, they can pick up. They have their ears to the ground, that everywhere they are trying to pick up. But of course, they have this one aggressive model like Bengal and Telangana, it's not working. But they will recalibrate. I'm sure they're recalibrating. RSS has a huge loop survey system and they're continuously with the ear to the ground. So before they do that, and the point is this, Pushparaj, if we do, they stand no chance. Sure. If we begin to, yes, Karnataka, if we begin to invest in those registers, people in India will still appreciate a more composite, harmonious, progressive question. So, our challenge is how do we bring, there are two difficulties for RSS. RSS is also highly neoliberal, because they have a their hierarchical, regressive social imagination goes with the market fundamentalism, because both philosophies want to push majority of people outside social benefits. Congress and left have the advantage is that they are on one social democratic, and if they can bring cultural symbolism that is inclusive with a more social democratic philosophy, just imagine the wonders it is going to do. And that is why I argue that Congress should move beyond transactional welfareism, push for big side demands, universal education, universal health care, universal basic income. With that and a cultural symbolism that is very local, it will be a formidable recipe for next 20 years for left progress.
It seems as if you are describing the Karnataka campaign to me.
Karnataka almost came close to that. Very close, but I would still say the demands have to be much bigger than free bus passes, those kinds of transactional demands. I think long term, the way to change really the mood of the people is to go beyond the transactional welfareism. I think, and the only parties that can do, I feel, is Congress. With under Mr. Gandhi, it looks very prospective that there is a left of center kind of a shift Congress has taken.
And the new president, Kharge
ji, yeah. So, if we can really push beyond this, free bus passes for women, 1500, good beginning to make. But I think if you want to empower people in terms of, education, it's a big demand on the ground. If we can put quality neighbor, like America, even an advanced capitalist country, did wonders with common neighborhood schooling system, and there is no reason why India should not invest 6-7% of its GDP on education, 5% on health. Now, we have 1.5% with this country of such magnitude, having 1% on health, it's a shame, it's a minuscule, it doesn't work, and these anxieties on the ground are what are working in favor of right wing. People live in such precarious conditions that then somebody comes and points to a neighbor Muslim as your enemy, people are willing to be easy to. So, if you cannot do that unless, so two things you have to combine, bring down the anxieties with big time social welfare measures, and then mobilize local cultural idiom.
Right. So, I want to go back to two things. One is that you spoke about being elitist right now. I am going to quote from your book here now. I am saying that you argue in your book that Dalit Bahujan political mobilization in India is in the midst of an epistemic crisis. I think you are saying this partly because the BJP has systematically inducted OBCs and subcaste OBCs and subcaste Dalits both within the cabinets and the organizations. This might be symbolic because they do not enjoy real power, but it also sends a signal to the communities that the BJP is pro them. And the state election studies, the national election studies show of Lokniti, the CSDS, show that 47% of subcaste OBCs are voting for the BJP in the national elections. The number reduces slightly for the state election, but doesn't drop below 40%. Now,
and 33% Dalits.
So, my point is this: why are progressive parties in that sense not actively working, engaging with, and appropriating the icons of OBC subcaste Dalits and actually giving them tickets, representation, political power, so on and so forth?
Yes, that's again a big area where progressive left and centrist parties have lost out. I am happy, I think in the Jaipur convention plenary, Raipur, I think Congress made a pitch for social justice and 50%. So, that's a big, I think Congress went in for a Dalit chief minister in Punjab, which is a very big move. You have 2 OBC chief ministers in Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh, that's a big move. So, three, who is the third? Karnataka now, yes, Siddaramaiah, of course, Siddaramaiah is much more than an OBC, he is a Lohiite, he has a left socialist. So, yes, so one, we need to represent these groups. 2, I think that representation has to be beyond that narrow identitarian version, that we need a larger, if we go down that path of narrow identitarian, merely representation through this corporal entity, just picking up an OBC just because he is an OBC, also is something that will not work for us in the long term. So Siddaramaiah is a very good example of what kind of OBCs and Dalits we require. Somebody who is invested in larger sense of, Siddaramaiah. Ideologically. Exactly. So there has to be. Otherwise, you will have this narrow identitarian, then they would swing, that then you cannot stop that swing. So what BJP has done is precisely that. I think they have benefited from the identity turn that happened post 1990s in anti-caste politics. Entire social justice agenda boiled down to representation. Then it boiled down to number question. So once that happens, bereft of a social and more so economic agenda. Now look at the anti-caste movements today in India are raising the question of English education, but they're not raising the question of public schooling.
Today, the Muslim in general expects that secular parties stand up for them. They expect that we will stand by them when they are lynched, when they are othered, when they are vilified in the movies, on social media and so on and so forth. Most secular progressive parties have actively shied away from this, partly because of the anxieties that you have spoken about. That is, that by standing for them, it could send a signal to certainly the mobilized Hindu vote bank, the Hindu that actively fears a Muslim resurgence, quote unquote. In that sense, do you think that if progressive parties were to actively condemn extremist elements on the Muslim side, but still stand on ground with Muslim forces? And I am giving you the example of a recent, I am moving away from the esoteric, I want to give a practical example. Recently in my hometown Kolhapur, there were riots, there were engineered riots wherein the SDM, the municipal commissioner was removed, there was no command and control structure, and suddenly, no doubt, there was a mitigating factor. There was a post on Aurangzeb and on Tipu Sultan on some WhatsApp groups, not WhatsApp groups, on some Instagram post. And then overnight, almost as if it was planned, there was a mob of 5,000–6,000 people that methodically attacked Muslim homes, vehicles, businesses, and so on and so forth. No progressive party actively said anything against it. Not just that, they did not send out any force like Gandhiji did in Noakhali to stand against this rioting mob consciously, because I am assuming they must be fearing a backlash from.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you have, that's precisely my point, that if you distance yourself, that's what has been the confusion that BJP, RSS, echo chambers has created for centrist parties. That that today centrist parties are confused. They do not know where to draw the fault lines, because they think if you criticize Muslims, you lose Muslim vote bank. If you stand by them, you lose Hindu vote bank. In the process, they lose both. Actually, that's what is happening on the ground. Muslims today are very angry with secular parties, and Hindus are very angry with a party like Congress, because they see it as pro-Muslim and the Muslims see it as being indifferent to Muslims. So this is the crisis that centrist secular parties like Congress have, not because they lack will, because they're confused. That's where I'm saying the way to break this conundrum that we have been pushed to a corner is that begin by disassociating from extremist elements, that people who don't see the difference between religion and other spaces which can be irreligious, which can work beyond Muslim identity. So there has to be an idea of the social Muslim here. So in that sense, I think obscurantist Muslims, we take very strong positions. For instance, when you go to a place like Kashmir, I think we'll have to take very strong position against Mujahideens. They are for Islamic State, and we are not. India as a democracy will not stand by Islamic State. I think we'll have to take this. The moment you take these kinds of very strong positions, you will see that Hindu mind will open up. And that's when you can push in social democratic questions of education, health, employment. And you said that your Muslim is the Muslim citizen. One who is interested in education, one is interested, and most Muslims are, religion. I mean, this is a trumped up case. This is a problem of 5% Muslim that has been made into a 90% image, and secular parties have not been able to convince Hindus that this is not the Muslim that we have in India. This is not. Even Prime Minister Modi himself gave the statement that homegrown terrorism in India is not there. that there is hardly any Muslim who becomes a terrorist from India. Most of it is kind of exported from.
In a sense, contradicting Kerala story.
Kerala, exactly. But that's the reality. That's the reality. Most Muslims today, in spite of what they have lived through, especially last 10 years, are still heavily invested in democracy. Nobody ever talks extremist language in India. No Muslim ever. That's why, if you've seen in my book, I've written against Islamophobia, that there is no that kind of a grand Islamophobia. I think, but these narratives have completely confused, they have kind of, bulldozed and terrorized centrist parties in a way. They are so scared to say this or that. I think we need to break our own fears. I think not only Hindus, I think parties have also gone into a fear psychosis. They're scared. If you say this, what will happen? If you say that, what's going to happen? I think we need to shake off those, and we need to trust people much more. We need to have that partly happened because, as you know, parties have lost contact on the ground. Unlike RSS, which works around the year, political parties stopped working with people. So they also, their imagination of people is also the narratives that are constructed. So I would say in Muslim case, I think we still have a very strong case, provided we take strong positions on certain things.
Sorry, so I want to ask you here, because you made something very startling right now. You make the assertion that progressive political parties have lost touch with communities and sections. In a sense, the left parties, and the Congress party, it has various frontals, the Mahila Congress, the Youth Congress, the National Students, NSUI, Union of India, the Dalit Congress, the OBC Congress, the Adivasi Congress. The left has their unions, the C2, the Women's Wing, IDWA from the CPIM, and the Women's Federation in CPI. These are in some senses connected to a section of whichever constituent group they are working with. Would you characterize them as disconnected from these sections?
Yeah, I feel so.
And I mean, I would urge you to sort of illustrate why you think that these are.
Any political party that is there in power for long, when I say connection, contact also means a kind of political perspective you hold, that I think it loses the touch. They begin to have a statist idea of people. That's happened with CPM in West Bengal. You lose connect. You might go to people, but you stop listening to them. I think that's the top-down kind of a thing. So that's both the problem with left and Congress over last. That
even now?
Yes, even now. That I think, don't think your whole organizational culture of Congress, if you look at on the ground, you have lost that mobilizational sensibilities and how to mobilize people.
But they are doing protests on.
I mean, you can do protests, you can bring your cadre and you can do protests. But I'm saying to inspire people on the ground. How do you go and inspire people with a vision?
So you think that these protests that they are doing are in a sense spectacle politics? They're not really converting.
Yeah, no, they're not. They're not able to spread beyond because they do not have a vision. But the moment you talk of an alternate vision, that's what I think was Bharat Jodo Yatra.
Right.
That with such limited organizational capacity on the ground, with such limited reach, the impact Bharat Jodo had. Today we are told even in Karnataka election, Bharat Jodo played a very big role. I mean, this is Siddaramaia's statement, their own assessment is that. That's because Congress, after a long time, stood for something. It said, look, we are going to fight this. You're not going to play softball, yes, no, we'll do some temple hopping, we'll do, no. Rahul Gandhi, I think, stood by and it took on, which obviously the jitters are very clear in his disqualification. They have got so shaken that they had to disqualify him because they really didn't want him that voice. The point is this, that means BJP and RSS quickly sense that this can be a game changer. Still, I have my complaints with with Bharat Jodo that it didn't come up with any program, it did not announce anything for people. It just spread love. I mean, love is good, but love without comfort, people are not going to be so privileged to, like us, as you pointed out. We can be loving to each other because we are comfortable. People need. So I've written continuously on this that along with compassion, you need welfareism. Well, compassion is going to come with welfareism. I thought Bharat Jodo will bring back that agenda. Congress is also struggling there. You have a large heavyweights who are very libertarian and neoliberal in your party, and then you have a soft social democrats. I think UPA two did very well. I think Madam Sonia did very well with having NAC. But for NAC, imagine, Congress would have maybe disappeared. NAC really saved you because you had a huge welfare, which is what people still remember Congress for. Okay, so that's precisely my point, that if mobilizational capacities would mean going with a vision. Today when I talk to, because I keep interacting with your students' organizations, with your cadre, they are lost for vision. I mean, they have nothing inspirational. What is that they would go and tell people? BJP and RSS have a very clear vision. A Hindu Rashtra means step by step. They have UCC, 370, and they have achieved. They will set another 10 agendas for post 24. What is our vision? What is that we are going to promise people? Let's say if we are to come in 24, we should have a vision by 29, 30. This is what we will do. Maybe universal education, complete health care, basic income scheme. Nyaya was a very powerful scheme. And then take on cultural positions strong, as you said, extremist Muslims, anti-extremist kind, inclusion of OBC, Dalits with this social democratic vision. I think we need to concretize a vision, and I am very confident that there will be huge groundswell because there is a generic discontent. But imagine our lack of imagination that in spite of this discontent, we are not able to reap the benefits. Sure. Why? I mean, that's the question that should, and I am genuinely surprised, Pushparaj, that because officers, Congress and regional parties have such long history and they are such astute politicians you have even at a regional level. How is that they are not sensing this on the ground, that in spite of discontent, they are not able to reap that benefits, that Congress wins by wherever it wins, it looks more like a fluke than a convincing victory. That Karnataka was a big, in that sense, a relief. So in one of the meetings with Congress, I said that the problem with the Congress is when it loses an election, it knows why it lost because of corruption charges, infighting. But when it wins an election, it does not know why it won. It is more confused than the opposition. That is a situation, I think, where we have to really break through.
In Karnataka's case, they are very clear on why they won.
Karnataka,
militarism plus deep engagement with subaltern culture.
Exactly. And Karnataka, they took positions. Yes, that's why I'm saying.
Very progressive.
That is the power of an OBC with a social vision. Yeah. That somebody like Siddaramaiah comes, he had a long Lohiyite history. He was a friend. He did not budge from saying that Gauri Lankesh was his personal friend. You need that kind of leaders.
It's also a galaxy of leaders, it's not just...
It's true, but
Kumar also,
he did the organizational work.
There's MB Patil who engaged with the Lingayas, there's Priyank Kharge who engaged with Dalits.
But what worked is that you give a social vision. Sure. That this hesitation that you will go midway, play is not going to work. I think that's where we have a lot of hope because Rahul has taken a very strong stand. He has come and he said this is a fight. Therefore, ideological. He is the only politician in India today who is critical of the RSS. No other even regional party leaders talk about RSS in the way we feel that there is a regressive vision, and we have to offer people that choice. That do you want to go with this regressive vision or do you want to stand for a progressive? But that will have to define. That's a problem. That even an empty critique is not going to work.
All right, so I'm now going to come into the fag end of our chat. Just the last question now. Somewhere in the book you argue what we need today is to forge solidarity between the Congress, the regional parties and the left, something that has begun to happen from Patna on the 23rd recently. This solidarity, you go on to argue, can no longer be that of mere political alliances and it has to go beyond seat sharing and electoral arithmetic. So, you are clearly talking about an ideological framework.
Social, I feel, yes. So, I feel that, I mean, now time is too short before 24, but this has to be a long-term vision, that alliance between political parties has to come with social solidarity between groups, because today each political party represents certain groups, like regional parties like RJD represent certain caste groups.
You can't say that about the Congress too.
Congress is an umbrella party, yes, but when you have an alliance with regional parties, the problem often is that OBCs, Dalits, Muslims, there is absolutely no cultural agenda there. How do you bring these social groups together? No, that's problem with BSP too, that they came with a Bahujan, which was a very powerful philosophy, but they never brought Muslims, Dalits, OBCs together. So, I think we need a long cultural agenda. Look at what RSS is doing on the ground. Today in much of North India, to mobilize, they have already moved from Ram to Shiv. Yeah. They are organizing Shiv Charchas. Now they are telling that Shiva is not a god but a guru. I mean, such a powerful symbolism to mobilize OBCs. No, that's the long range that they have taken. But what is our agenda for OBCs? What is our cultural agenda for OBCs? How do you bring OBCs and Dalits together? Because the massive social prejudices. So I think anti-colonial movement under Mahatma Gandhi fought both. It had both social and political agenda, right? Post-independence, I think we abdicated that social agenda. We should have picked up that social agenda. How do we fight prejudices? That social experiment should have been on, and 50 years we would have progressed much. And we left that field, and RSS was the only social organization that was working, and obviously fanning the prejudices and increasing the gap, increasing the social conflicts. Today, I think we have to get back to that plane, that and we do not know how to fight it. Because unless you experiment it on ground, nobody can have a blueprint. That how do you bring Muslims, Dalits, OBCs? To begin with, we'll have to begin saying that there are massive prejudices between these groups. And as long as it articulates only in political alliances, that is going to be scaffolding, right, without any content. So I think simultaneously, if there is a big game-changing result in 24, I think we should take this social agenda seriously, and we should play the long game, not in terms of immediate results, start waking up 6 months before, forge some numbers together, and that's why BJP is so confident, because their entry point is cultural and social. But they feel that even if you put this alliance together, they can break that through. Look at what happened with farmers movement. Such a massive uprising, they go back, but they vote for BJP. Because they've tapped into that Jat identity, social and political prejudices on the ground, which
I don't think there has been an election after that actually.
There has been no election in terms of UP.
Sure.
UP election, people went back in Western UP. Lakhimpur, where farmers where the car mowed down the farmers, BJP won all 7 seats. So obviously prejudices can work very, very deep. That's where the strength of BJP and RSS come from, that even if all political parties come, they say they are not worried, but we will do it, because they feel that they can break even that arithmetic rhythm through social engineering of a different kind. So unless we don't enter at some point into social and cultural plane, we will always be at this receiving end, this shaky alliances, last minute cobbling of cabals, and that's a very short term game.
Excellent, excellent. So I think we have covered a wide range of topics, and having read significant sections of this book, I do feel that to a large extent you are raising the right questions. In some places I feel that you do answer some of these questions, and hopefully when the Indian edition is out by the end of this month, I would urge our viewers to actually pick up this book once again. It's Politics, Ethics and Emotions in New India. It is Routledge, which is an academic publisher, but it has implications both programmatic and normative for day-to-day politics, journalism, policy for all of us today. I thank Dr. Gudavarthy for joining us for this brief chat, and I hope that he'll join us again very soon.
Always pleasure working with you all, Pushparaj.
Thanks, Prof.